Hi there. It's January the 25th, and we're continuing our journey through the good news of Matthew, and we're reading from chapter 16, verse 13, through to chapter 17, verse 9. This reading we have today is pivotal in the story of Jesus and his progression from the start of his ministry through to his cross and his resurrection. Because this is the point where he confronts his disciples and he wants to see what his disciples have made, and as apostles what they've made of him so far. And so they're at Caesarea Philippi, which is up in the north part of Israel, getting up into the foothills of the mountains. And there he asks them, "Who do people say I am?" He wants to know what they've learned of him, what they've received from him. And so some say, well, that you're John the Baptist, come back from the dead. Some say that you are a prophet, Elijah. And then Peter suddenly has this insight, this moment that bursts in on him. And he says, "You are the Messiah. You are the Son of the living God." And Jesus locks in with that and he says, "Yes, you've got it, you've understood, and what's more, you haven't got this from my teaching, you've got this by revelation of the Father has revealed this to you." And then Jesus comes back to Peter, because Peter has this revelation from the Lord can now build on that, and he says, "You are Peter, you are Petros." And Petros is a kind of a play on words, because the Greek word Petros means rocky. So he's literally saying, "You are rocky, and on this Petra, on this rock, I will build my church." And he's saying that this is the revelation you have. Revelation is key, that when the Father reveals Jesus, then Jesus' power, Jesus' works can begin to be released through his people. And so then, because they've realized, they've understood who Jesus is, Jesus then reveals more of his purposes. And it says, from this time he began to tell them that his purpose was to go to Jerusalem, and there he would be betrayed and given over, he would be crucified, and he would rise again. Now, the same Peter who's just had this revelation now goes back into protection, defensive mode, and he kind of steps back and he says, "Jesus, this is not going to happen to you. We won't allow you to be handed over and to be taken away like this." And Jesus does something very strange to the man who he's just said, "You are rocky and I'm going to build my church on that rock." He turns around and he says, "Get behind me, Satan. You don't think the things of God, you think the things of men." And Peter is completely, he must have been nonplussed by this harsh reaction of Jesus. But Jesus is speaking to the temptations for him to kind of try and bypass the cross. And then Jesus makes it clear that anybody who follows him is going to have to come the same way that he's going. That is, that the way of discipleship, the way of following Jesus, is not a way of self-fulfillment. It's not about realizing myself and my potential. It's actually about self-donation. It's actually about self-giving. It's about saying no to myself. And not just saying no to myself in a way that makes me look ascetic and harsh and austere, but actually in a way that makes the most of who I am and gives it away. This is what Jesus is doing. He's giving himself for the sake of others. And he says anyone who comes after him actually is going to take up their cross. And anyone who took up their cross, the next thing that happened to them was that they were going to be nailed to it. So there's a real call here to give oneself away, to follow Jesus where he's going to Jerusalem. Then at the beginning of chapter 17, Jesus goes up the mountain. Now, remember again, Matthew is a Jew writing for Jews and to Jews. And whenever Jesus goes up a mountain, there's always that echo of Moses going up the mountain to meet with God. And here Jesus not only goes up the mountain, but while he's there, he is transformed. The Greek word is metamorphosed. Jesus is changed before his disciples, and something kind of falls off him. He's revealed in the glory that he has in the Father's presence. Heaven breaks into earth. Not only that, but there are two figures standing talking with him. There's Moses and there's Elijah. Now this again for a Jewish writer Matthew is very important, because Moses represents Torah, he represents all the instruction of God, and Elijah represents the prophets. So here are represented the Torah and the prophets, the two great strands of Jewish understanding and thinking, and they are both looking to Jesus and talking excitedly with him. There's discussion going on. And here, Peter, maybe not knowing what to do or what to say, says the first thing that comes into his mind. He says, "Oh, it's so good to be here. Why don't we make shelters for you? Why don't we make Sukkot for you?" And actually, Sukkot is the festival that has to do with Messiah coming. And so maybe Peter thinks, "Oh, this would be a good time to celebrate." But actually, then these other prophets disappear. And actually, there's a voice that says, "This is my son, listen to him." And then they find that Jesus is there on his own. Jesus tells them not to say anything about the appearance of his glory, the revelation of his sonship. But from this time, as Jesus comes down this mountain, he's now headed for Jerusalem. So this is the unraveling of his destiny. So from this time, Jesus is journeying towards Jerusalem. He also tells his disciples not to say anything about this until he's risen from the dead, so that the whole thing comes together. He doesn't want this being spoiler going out and telling people what's going to happen. He wants to keep to the story. This is really key that we see here, Jesus' pivotal point here, that he is being revealed not just as Messiah the human, but also as Messiah the Son of God in his full glory. That he is the one who completes the story. He completes the story of Israel. That's why Moses and Elijah are there. He's calling us also to give away ourselves. He's calling us also to this self-donation, to this self-denial, this giving ourselves away. And it's a joy to follow him in that, because as we do that, we see his church being established. We see his assembly being built up and being spread throughout the earth, and his peace being spread throughout the earth as heaven colonizes earth with his peace. Have a very good January the 25th.